Okay, we're ready to record.
Okay, everyone. So go ahead, feel free at the end, feel free to use our link to fill out our survey. But Kathy, we will send it over to you to take it away with your presentation.
Okay, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Shelby and to the ikahi Mediation Center for having me. And thank you to all of you who showed up today. I know that for some of you, this may be, this may be your first time, and for others, this may be a regular series that you tune into. And I just appreciate everybody who's here today and spending your lunch with us and with me. And I hope that there's a lot of value that you get today. I have a lot to share, so I invite you to have a notepad if you're someone who likes to write notes, or if you're somebody who's just listening in, that's completely okay too. I am a coach at heart, leadership and life coach at heart. So my style is one of, I like engaging with the room, getting a lot of feedback from you all, and really being able to use your real life examples to make this session and our time together today as valuable as possible. And so I actually first want to invite us to see who's in the room. So I invite you to use your chat and just type in, right? One allows me to know who you all are, and also for us to build this community today. One, name, location, something that's bringing you joy. So for me, my name's Kathy. I am actually based in North Hollywood in Los Angeles, California. And something that's bringing me joy today is seeing Summer, Lauren, and Misty on the call. They're personal, friends of mine. And so, yeah, that's something that is bringing me joy. So I invite you to type that into the chat while I go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Go ahead and present. Okay, welcome, Miranda. Beautiful sunshiny day. Aloha, everyone. Connecting with people, playing in nature, right? Moani, welcome. Family bringing joy and responsibility. Aloha, right? Lisa, welcome. Welcome, Tyra and Amy. All right, let me make sure. Can everyone see my screen? I just want to make sure. Welcome, Will. Summer weather still amazing. Ohana, my dog. Yes. Okay, great. So thank you again, Shelby, for introducing our topic, from conflict to connection. I have quite a lot packed in here, so if we don't get to some topics, that's okay. But I just wanted to provide as much value based on the wisdom I've learned, just from my journey. So let me go ahead and go to our next slide. And I did want to share, I know that a lot of you are based in Hilo, and you have a wonderful island. I actually was able to visit with family April of last year. So this is actually a picture with my niece and also my two older sisters before we went to the volcano, and also we went to a luau. And so I just wanted to just share a little bit about me outside of our topic today. Okay. So before we dive in, I usually start my sessions in this way, just because I realize that we don't have a lot of time together. And oftentimes, there's a lot that may be happening in our own individual worlds outside of this space. So it's a tool that I personally like to use for myself. I had shared this with my community group at church earlier this week. Of oftentimes I may have 10 things that are on my mind, right? But there's a reason why. I truly believe that each of you are here for a reason. And so this is just a tool that you can use to help you to stay mindful and grounded in our session today, our time together today. So if you have a notepad, or even if you wanted to put in the chat, right? On the left-hand side, we would put top of mind, mindful, right? And throughout our 60 minutes today, anytime, oh, I need to walk my dog, right? Or I need to call this person back. I have to, mail this out, right? You're going to list that on the left-hand side, something that's top of mind. And then mindful presence, as I mentioned, right? We're all here for a reason. We hopped onto this call for a reason. What is your why today? So I invite you to write your why. And anytime that there's a thought that comes up that you're like, oh, right? I'm going to list this on top of mind, but I'm going to remind myself, right? This is why I'm here today. And that's going to help you to stay grounded, right? Okay. So that's just a tool. 3 objectives that I have today is really just deepening our self-awareness while fostering empathy and understanding around conflict to connection, right? Really providing practical tools and strategies from adversarial to collaborative approaches in our relationships. This could be professional, this could be personal relationships, family, colleagues, you know, whoever it might be, people at church, right? And then also for us to have individual and communal learning. So we're actually going to start first with 2 questions. And for this one, I would love to hear at least 2 people share out verbally. So our first question is, describe a relationship that means a lot to you, right? It's a relationship, it brings you peace, comfort, a sense of safety, right? And really sharing out, right? What is it about this relationship or this safe person, right, that you value? So I'd love to hear at least one share out. And then the second person will answer our second one, which is describe a recent interaction where someone gave you tough feedback, right? How did the conversation go? And what specifically was helpful or unhelpful? So for the first one, if somebody just wants to unmute, that would be great. And just share with our group a relationship that means a lot to you. Who would like to share?
I noticed that we have some comments in the chat. My relationship with my husband means the world to me.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Moani.
Thank you, Moani.
Perfect. And is there anything specific? It could be Moani or others also as you're sharing. Is there anything specific about the relationship with your husband that you value?
I feel safe, and that's really important to me. I've been through a lot of trauma, and he is the most beautiful, safe human I know.
And may I ask you, Moani, what is it about your husband that created that sense of safety for you?
He has really good boundaries, and he stands up for people that are harmed. We're whistleblowers on the federal scale and also here in Hilo. And I'm doing things that are really scary, and he supports me in it. And I feel safe with him, and I can do things with his support that I may not have been able to do alone.
I love that. Thank you so much. Mahalo for sharing, Moani. Your husband sounds amazing. And so now we'll take a look at the second question, right? So if somebody would be brave, we'll have a brave space here, but describing a recent interaction where someone left you some tough feedback, right? How did the conversation go? And what specifically was helpful or unhelpful?
I'll share. I recently was working on a project, and when meeting with a group of folks who we were collaborating for this project with, one of the team members spoke about frustration about the process, but was actually touching on elements that I had a part in, and it was really difficult to get to a solution or the true crux of like a solution to move forward with. And there was lots of there was actually yelling and cursing, and it just totally shut me down. I was like, this is a lot. I need to take a break. That was very challenging.
Miranda, thank you so much for sharing, right? One, it was frustration with the process. And oftentimes in the professional work setting, we interact with so many different folks, and it can be hard to get to a consensus. And even recognizing that your body's natural response was, whoa, someone's yelling, they're screaming, right? And so it shut down, right? And so that was completely normal. And I appreciate you for being brave and just sharing about your experience. And I'm sorry that happened to you in your experience. So Moani and Miranda, thank you so much for giving us some tangible examples of different, relationships, but interactions with different folks, right? Because that's going to help with our grounding for today. So let me actually go to this next one. So we're going to do some setting the foundation. So our approach at Amalu Coaching is we actually spoke with our audience, right? When we initially started 2.5 years ago, our main target was working with survivors of domestic violence. I'm a survivor who's been directly but also indirectly impacted by domestic violence. And it was very important for me to speak directly with the folks who are going to be the recipients of the services we are providing and hear from them, right? What is your definition of healthy relationships? So we actually spoke with 48 folks who self-identified as survivors of domestic violence. And this is the general trend that came from those results, right? So I invite you to think of, when it comes to a healthy relationship, our approach is that if one of these 3 stools are missing, right, then that creates a barrier, right? There's no safety. So the 3 pillars of a healthy relationship: trust, respect, and healthy communication. And how we define healthy communication is communication that is proactive, right? Communication that's transparent and explicit, and also communication that is accountable, right? And we put self and we put others because our approach is that a healthy relationship with yourself means that you trust yourself, right? Sometimes when we have hard conversations, okay, I may be in fear and doubt, I don't want to speak up, right? Or maybe we come from families that like we had more indirect communication, right? But that takes a level of trust in yourself. You have that self-respect. Okay, I'm going to set some boundaries for myself and how this person may or may not be, communicating with me. And then also I can control on my end how I'm communicating. Am I being proactive? Am I being transparent and explicit? And am I being accountable in my communication, right? And as we do that mirror work, right, just like this picture shows us, we can also do the same for the folks that are around us as well, right? Whether it's in our professional relationships or personal relationships as well. Is there trust there, right? Maybe this person hasn't been communicating with me. Okay, so then there's not a healthy relationship there, right? And the last thing that I'll share is that oftentimes there's a root 1 that may be causing the discourse, but oftentimes if it's not addressed, then that may lead to disrespect and also distrust, right? So for the purpose of our conversation today, typically what I found is that there's 2 different ways that we tend to talk or have conversations, right? Today, we're going to really be exploring through dialogue this topic of from conflict to connection. The other second way typically is through discussion, right? We're trying to reach a certain consensus. So similar to what Miranda had mentioned, like there was a process and her team may have had to reach a certain conclusion, right? But for today, we're really just exploring our own views and deepening our understanding around from conflict to connection. And I define those 2 because it's important that as we're learning this, as you're having conversations with your teams or, your clients, the folks that you work with, right? You may also want to define that too before you're even having that conversation. Okay, is this a conversation where it's going to be a dialogue where we're exploring the conversation and I'm helping them to come up with their own meaning around whatever it is we might need to talk about? Maybe it's a change in your organization or whatever it might be. Or is this a discussion, right? Okay, this is direct feedback, right? And this is specific behavioral changes that we need to see, right? There's a consensus there. But for the purpose of our topic today, this is going to be a dialogue. This is going to be an exploration. And so I will invite you all to share out as we continue in this Lunch and Learn today. Okay, so trusting relationships. This is going to be a part where you all can participate, right? So this actually came again through the research that we did speaking with our audience. And we actually created a well-being survey that really gauges someone's holistic well-being around these different questions or indicators. Trusting relationships is one of the questions on our survey. And so I actually wanted to invite you all to self-identify, right? So when it comes to trusting relationships, we define it as, give me one moment here. So building trust in critical relationships, demonstrating cultural diversity and competence, and using interpersonal interactions to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes, right? Demonstrating personal presence and confidence in your relationships in general. So when you see this, right, trusting relationships, I want you to really self-identify just in the majority of your relationships, right? Do you identify with green, right? In general, I'm willing, right? I'm willing to be vulnerable. I'm willing to be open and honest with others and believe in the reliability, good intentions of those I interact with based on mutual trust, dependability, and respect, right? Because again, as we looked at, you know, the 3 pillars of healthy relationships, now we're diving deeper into trust, right? Yellow, right? I'm sometimes willing to be vulnerable, open and honest with others, may have occasional hesitancy or skepticism with trusting others, right? I show willingness to develop meaningful connections and I take steps to build that trust over time. And then the last, maybe you're someone who might struggle a bit, right? With being vulnerable, open and honest, maybe due to past experiences, fears that are leading to skepticism, guardedness, difficulty forming and maintaining trusting relationships. And there's no shame in it, right? I was this many years ago. I would identify myself there in pink, just thinking about, you know, how like just family dynamics growing up and stuff like that, it caused some guardedness in me, right? So there's no shame, but I'd love to just invite you to share in the chat if you self-identify as green, yellow, and pink, and then we can go from there. Okay, I see yellow. Thank you, Lisa. Will, so situational, of course, 100%. But green, yellow, and closer to green. I love that, Will. Horrific abuse. Yep, work really hard to be vulnerable, open, and honest. My life is green. I love that, Moani. It's all about growth, right? Yellow, I see a lot of yellow, some pinks, right? Making my way to green, perfect. I love that growth mindset, green, love it. And now we're gonna do another one very quickly, right? Thank you all for those that shared, and feel free to continue sharing in the chat if you haven't yet. This one's actually going to look at healthy boundaries. I loved how, Moani, you mentioned that your husband provides that safe space for you because of the boundaries, right, that he's set. And how we define healthy boundaries is effectively setting and maintaining healthy boundaries by clearly communicating their needs and limits, asserting themselves when necessary, and consistently enforcing those boundaries in relationships, right? So I won't read this out just because it's on the screen, but I invite you to share in the chat where you would self-identify as far as healthy boundaries. I see green, solid yellow. Okay. Yellow. A lot of yellows in the chat. Yellow, perfect. So go ahead, I continue utilizing the chat if you haven't yet. For boundaries, I struggle. Yep, yellow, completely okay, Moani. All right, so thank you all for engaging in that. So part of our framework, we call it our 4-step wellness scan framework. The A in scan, it stands for acknowledge, alleviate, and ask. And so if you're taking notes, I encourage you to write this down, right? When we're engaging in especially hard conversations, conflict is actually necessary for growth. Oftentimes things tend to get worse before they get better in a lot of instances if we have the right tools and strategies, right? And so this is one way, and I encourage you to even take a screenshot. Maybe you're watching on your phone, right? But this is the A in our scan framework, right? Acknowledging, alleviating, and asking. Again, when we look at the healthy relationships, first we're doing that mirror work and asking ourselves these questions. And then that's going to help us before we're engaging with the folks on the other side. Maybe it's somebody on your team or a colleague or whoever it might be, right? So first, right, let's say for acknowledge and alleviate, you're asking yourself, okay, I'm just going to use, Miranda, I hope it's okay. I'm going to use your example about, let's say, it's a team environment, right? And some frustration is occurring with different members on the team because maybe the process isn't clear, right? Okay, what is the unmet need in this situation? Okay, maybe for me, or maybe for the different team members, the unmet need is that we need to talk to one another with respect, right? Okay, maybe my need right now, I can't control that somebody just swore out, right? But my need is I need to walk away and calm down, right? That's what I need right now, right? So I'm a big fan of journaling. And if you're somebody who's like me, who likes to journal, I encourage you to really journal these out. Again, asking yourself these questions. And then also the second part to that is asking yourself, what is the unmet need for the folks that are involved, right? So maybe if you're a manager and you have a team member who is, maybe they need some more support, what is the unmet need that they have that's not being, maybe it's not clarified, right? Or what options do I have? What resources do I have to alleviate what might be needed for myself and also for others? Here's a sentence stem that we use, right? So actually naming that out. The unmet need is blank. You can write that for yourself, and then also, let's say for the team members, right, who are trying to come up with a consensus on a work project. The unmet need for the group is this, and let's say if you wanted to take it one step further, I would even invite you to actually list, specific team members, their names, right? And because you know them best, that you may see some trends, and also, where there may be some, discourse amongst the group when you journal this out for yourself. And so, yeah, the other two questions is really about how can you give whatever that unmet need is to yourself. Okay, if I walk away, I'm giving my mind a break, and then I'm going to revisit this, in let's say 10 minutes or whatever it whatever that might be, right? And then also, how can you give it to the other parties, journaling that out. And then if you need support, sometimes it's like, I'm doing this journaling, but I need some extra support, right? Who can help you alleviate what's needed? Friends and family, right? Maybe they're just being a listening ear while you're venting. Friends of friends, maybe professional help. Maybe let's say if you're in a team setting and you have a boss, right? It could be, asking help from them. Maybe they have a resource that could help with whatever that project is to help it move it forward, right? Okay. Any questions before I move on? Because I know we kind of went through a lot of material so far. And so I just wanted to pause and just take a quick moment to see if there's any questions. And feel free if you want to either unmute or you can also put in the chat. That's okay before we move forward. Nope, I don't see any questions. Okay, perfect. And if you do have a question as we're going through the presentation, I do also invite you to raise your hand. There's an option on your bottom toolbar. You can actually raise your hand and I'll make sure to answer your question. Do you think good relationships take time to build? 100%, Charlie. I really do think that it takes time to build. And I think that it's something that takes a lot of consistency, right? And so even when I think of that framework that we have with our approach to healthy relationships, I have a sticky note literally on my desk right here, right? Where I say, are you building trust? Are you building mutual respect? Am I having healthy communication that's transparent, accountable, right? So it definitely takes time to build, and it also it takes consistency. And even when we do, we're human, right? So oftentimes, like, we may have a lot of misunderstandings or conflict, but it's really around, like, how do I get back on track to making this relationship better? Alleviating is not meeting the need, but creating a plan to make not having the need met bearable. And then identifying integrity seems a key part of relationships, I think. 100%, yes. Alleviating is not creating a plan. Yeah, actually the N, Will, is next steps. Actually it helps you to create a plan for the next steps. Conflict's really scary for me. My thinking brain sometimes disappears and an emotional brain shows up when there's conflict or around me. I have to stay in my thinking brain in real time against my family. Yes, in order to keep my neck. Okay. Yes, thank you so much for sharing, Moani. Okay, so keep the questions coming. Here's a few considerations. We won't go through all of these just for time's sake, but when it comes to approaching tough conversations, right? Really considering timing is essential. Is one, I like to ask myself, does this conversation really need to happen, right? Oftentimes, let's say if you journal, I've supported folks where, you know, they've journaled about it and they've got all of their frustrations and all of that out on paper, or they talked it out with, let's say, maybe their therapist or family member, right? And then they felt better, right? And they were like, actually, I don't need to have a conversation with this person. I feel much better. But if you do, right, let's say that a conversation needs to happen, considering the timing, maybe maybe you're in a team setting and there's a big deadline that you all have in 2 days, and this conversation can wait until after that deadline, right? So really being mindful of, and let's say with the person that you need to speak with, let's say you're a manager and you're speaking directly to a direct report, right? Let's say in that situation, you might know that they're dealing with some family stressors outside of work. Okay, is this the best time to be having this conversation? No. Okay, let me write in my calendar, you know, to remind myself, you know, let's work with them on when we can actually carve out space to discuss what needs to be discussed. And also timing for yourself, right? Sometimes somebody may let's say within your team or whoever it might be, they may come with wanting to give feedback or whatever it might be. But let's say for you, you're in the middle of a deadline and they may not know that, like being explicit to name like, hey, I value what you say, right? And this is really important to me. I can tell this is very important to you too, right? Because I have this deadline tomorrow, is it okay, right? And like getting their buy-in of, if we have this conversation on this date. And I would recommend like being explicit around like, when is a good time that you would, you know, ask them, and then inviting their feedback. Preparation on approach. So what do I need to have a heart at peace? We're going to look at what that means. There's a framework that I have that can help with that. Internal biases, am I coming in with? What we mean by that is that, you know, when we grew up, we were all socialized into this world. We came in learning about our surroundings and our world through the messages from our family, from the media, right? From school, from our peers, right? And so oftentimes we have unconscious biases that shape our perception of how we show up in the world, right? So asking ourselves, like, what biases am I coming in with potentially, right? And then also considering cultural awareness and sensitivity. And also this last one is a really important one of, what is my intention for this conversation? What is the goal or the outcome? What would success look like at the end of, you know, our team discussing this process to meet our goal, right? And then we won't dive into these last three, but just, again, if you wanted to take a screenshot, setting norms, if there was harm that was caused, SBI stands for situation, behavior, and impact. It's a framework that can really help to not, you know, sometimes when there's a lot of hot tension, it can feel like, oh, this person is attacking me as a person or my identity. And the SBI helps to really focus on the behavior and not directly on the person, right? What is the behavior that needs to be changed? And then lastly, pursuing reconciliation to repair harm. So really looking at, where is their shared values, right? Where are their shared goals? Where are their commonalities? Where can we meet from a place of unity, right? And really coming in with that mindset. Okay. So now in these next few slides, we're gonna look at these three in yellow, right? What do I need to have a heart at peace? A little bit, we're gonna touch on internal biases, and if we have time, we will look at cultural awareness and sensitivity. Okay, so Arbinger, he developed a framework that's called the peacemaking pyramid. It's also called Anatomy of Peace. And oftentimes when we're correcting, when there's a conflict, I'll say I'm guilty of this as well, right? we often like to tackle what's wrong, right? Okay, immediately the quickest way, let me try to correct the issue, right? Hey, I need you to do this. Let me just quickly try to correct the issue and jump into a solution, right? And with Arbinger's peacemaking pyramid, he actually says that the solution to or the potential solution, right, to creating peace in that scenario is actually looking at the level right below it, right? Am I teaching and am I communicating, effectively, right? Am I being explicit? Am I being transparent? Am I being proactive? Or even if even if it wasn't proactive, am I still communicating what I need? And that's also related to boundaries, essentially. We're firm believers that it always starts with empathy, right? So maybe you've done that. You've named explicitly what you're looking for as far as a behavior change. But maybe this next step then, if it's not being fixed, is to really come from that place of empathy, of listening and learning, right? Am I actively listening about the other person's world? And a resource I would love to share with you all. I was in grad school and they had us read this, but it's called Never Split the Difference. And it's by Chris Voss, but he really shares around the importance of actively listening as humans. And as someone who's guilty of this as well, I tend to have 10 different thoughts going on at once, right? But when you're actively listening, that means that you're putting all of that on hold and you're truly in that mindset to really understand that person's world and putting yourself in the shoes of the person who's on the receiving end, right? It takes a lot of dying to self, quote unquote, to really be able to actively listen. Maybe you are doing that. And maybe part of that is building the relationship. When I was a manager working within Los Angeles Unified Schools, right? Oftentimes when my team had a lot of issues, I'm like, instead of work, let's actually plan a team outing outside of this space, right? And so, there were times where we had a potluck or we were building the relationship among the team. Outside of the professional space so that they could see themselves as, hey, we're human beings, right? We're not just working together in this professional setting, but no, now okay, cool. You like to dance. Now you're building relationships outside of just that one environment that you're in. And maybe you are doing that, right? Maybe you're already building the relationship. And so what I like to tell folks is that the next step is helping things to go right. And we actually want to spend the majority of our time on these lower levels, right? Maybe there's other factors, external factors that are impacting why this person may be resistant to whatever the change might be, right? So let's say, like, for example, when COVID hit, everything went virtual, right? And I remember that I had some team members who really they did not like that we had to shift everything to online, right? But building supporting relationships with people who have influence on the person. I know for me as a manager, I had to ask, maybe others on the team who had if I didn't have the strongest relationship, if I'm, being honest with, certain members on the team, okay, let me talk with those who have influence on the person, other members on the team, or maybe, like there's somebody within our org who they have a stronger relationship with. Maybe they're the ones who's having a conversation with them around like, hey, these are the reasons why these changes need to happen and why we're moving in this direction, right? But building those supporting relationships, because it really does take a village when it comes to, having that communal support. And then lastly, we're going to look at this one in the next slide as well, getting out of the box. So maybe you're doing all of these things in the pyramid to help things go right. And maybe it's about the approach, right? Am I approaching the relationship with a heart at peace? And what does that mean, heart at peace? So I know this is there's a lot of information on this slide. So what we mean by heart of peace is that in every situation, we have a choice, right? So a heart at peace is really saying that, hey, I'm honoring the humanity of the person, especially when there's a lot of tension that's on the other side. And I'll say that, there's times where we may find ourselves in both, right? Oh, my heart is at peace. Other times where your heart's at war, right? Where essentially with the heart at peace, and if you make that choice, it's, hey, I'm honoring the humanity. That's the goal, shared humanity, right? I'm honoring the humanity of the person on the other side. I see you as a person with needs, right? That are equivalent to my own, right? And when we're looking at the other side, right? Heart of war. Maybe sometimes we have gotten really frustrated or somebody's continued to disrespect our boundaries, right? Oftentimes you'll see that you know, we may see others as an object, right? And 4 mental boxes or ways that implicit unconscious bias can show up is these 4 different ways of thinking. So it really would require a choice, number one, as we see here, but also a mindset shift. So when we're looking at these 4 mental boxes, the better than box is the one that's really coming from a place of superiority of, hey, I'm great, right? Like I need this, and you know, I'm important. It's virtuous, it's right, it's my way or the highway, right? Sometimes let's say worse than box, right? Like I've worked with folks before who, let's say that you know, with bosses, they had trouble with talking with higher ups because of previous relationships, and okay, you know, I made a mistake, I am not as good, right? You know, they have a faded kind of a mentality. That's the worse than box, right? The I deserve box is one where, hey, I don't get any respect, right? You know, I'm mistreated, a victim, I'm unappreciated. They don't recognize all that I've done for this organization. And again, this is not to shame or condemn anyone. It's just to really help to think like, am I in one of these mental boxes, and am I making a choice, right, to move to the other side, which is a heart of peace. And then the last box is must be seen as box of, and I'll relate to this one where, you know, oftentimes it may come across as like, okay, I need to be doing this perfectly, right? I need others to you know, see me in a certain way, right? So needing to be thought well of, right? It may sometimes come across as inauthentic, for example. And so these are just 4 examples of typical mental boxes or biases that are associated with heart of war. And I thought I saw some activity in the chat. Let's see. So I'm going to pause. Yes, feel free, Miranda, to take a picture of the slide. To put ourselves in others' shoes, we need to get out of ours. I love that, Charlie, 100%. I appreciate the must be seen as box. How does it relate to the collusion diagram? The must be seen as box. That's a great question. How does this relate to the collusion diagram? Do and see. So colluding, essentially, like, again, when I think of healthy relationship, I always go back to that framework, because when you're looking at like being transparent and, you know, I'll just say transparent when it comes to healthy communication, that comes from a place of authenticity. And so yeah, I would say that I would return, I hope that answers your question, but I would return back to that foundation. Because collusion, how we define collusion is actually just, you know, not doing anything and sticking to what we call status quo, right? And so that is, yeah, these are the 4 mental boxes. That was a great question. So if you have any other questions, feel free to put it in the chat. But for the purpose of time, we're going to keep going. So 2 tactics to help us with alleviate. We looked at alleviate. We call it mirroring and labeling. And this actually was taken from Chris Voss. We talk about, especially for those that may have direct reports or maybe leaders in the room, right? Mirroring is really, it's like paraphrasing, except it's really repeating either the last 3 words somebody's saying or the most important 1 to 3 words that someone said. And the reason why we mirror is to get clarity, right? So these 2 tactics are really about bonding and empathizing with the person who you're speaking with, right? So oftentimes when I'm repeating something or the most important 1 to 3 words somebody's saying, it's so that I'm understanding where they're coming from. It helps with, when we looked at that framework, peacemaking pyramid, listening and learning, right? Okay, this is helping me to understand your world, right? This is what I took from it. Is that right? And I would usually invite you to ask that question. Did I get that right? And then they can clarify or they can expand with what they said. Labeling, we're emotional creatures as humans, right? Labeling is really about alleviating, as we mentioned earlier. It's about validating someone's emotion by acknowledging it. You don't feel their pain, but you label it, right? So maybe somebody is really frustrated about change that's happening in your organization that's impacting you and your teammates, or maybe impacting the clients that you work with, right? So, maybe they're venting to you if you're the manager, let's say, and you're letting them share out their thoughts, right? What could be helpful is naming, the frustration, or naming what you're hearing them say, right? Okay, that sounds like it's really, it's really challenging for you. That sounds really frustrating, right? Can you share more? Can you share more? Right? So it's just labeling where they might be at, which will help with that empathizing piece. Okay, consider, I don't know if anyone's heard of Dr. Morabian. He has a formula that essentially says there's 3 elements when it comes to our perception of a person, right? And again, when we look at mirror work, but also when it comes to our relationships with other people, a lot of our communication is actually nonverbal, right? So in his research, he found that 7% of the time, people are, they take in 7% of the actual words that were said, right? But the majority is actually through body language. This could be through facial expressions, maybe crossing of arms, right? Shows a lot of resistance. If somebody's really comfortable, maybe they are, their arms are out wide, right? So that's what that 55% really describes, is that nonverbal communication. And especially when you look at different cultures, right? This is universal. Like oftentimes, if you see crossed arms, that's pretty universal. And then 38% is actually the tone in someone's voice, right? Okay, I may be hearing you say this, but the tone sounded like there's, it sounds like you're a little upset by, what this change is in the organization, right? And so these are just some considerations to think about in your interactions with others. And then lastly, we're not going to dive into all of them, but if you wanted to take a photo, please feel free. So just thinking about cross-cultural considerations, I'll just talk a little bit about time versus event orientation for time. And then we'll start closing out, and I'll invite us for any questions. But essentially when we are, like, for example, I live here in Los Angeles. It's one of the most diverse cities that has folks from all over the world that visit, right? So oftentimes I've interacted with so many different people from all over the world. And when we think about cross-cultural considerations, like, for example, time versus event orientation. I come from a Filipino background. I'm half Filipino, right? And we have this concept that we actually say, oh, there's a birthday party on Saturday. Okay, Filipino time, right? We show up 2 hours late. But the event is what's most important. It doesn't matter that, it doesn't matter that, everybody shows up at 5, which is when the flyer says, but just the fact that the party is taking place, and everybody's having a great time, that would be more of a culture that is event oriented, right? Versus, let's say I've worked with folks who are, let's say, from Japan, let's say, right? A time orientation is, you may be interacting with folks, and maybe your organization too is more time oriented, where, hey, our meeting is at 11. Okay, like, we have to be there right at 11, right? And so, it's important to know, like, when you're considering the culture of the other person, or maybe the culture of the organization, right? Is it a time versus event orientation culture? And that will help you as you are, talking with that individual and engaging with that individual. So these are some other examples of cross-cultural considerations. All right. And I like to just share this quote of, we can't change other people, right? We can only invite them to change, and we can also influence them. And sometimes that's really freeing, of knowing, like, hey, at the end of the day, and sometimes with relationships, if, you're doing all these different strategies and tips, and sometimes it's recognizing, okay, maybe, like, let's say if it's a workplace issue or a structure issue, and hey, you know, like it's recognizing maybe this isn't the right fit for me, right? But making that decision for yourself, because sometimes there are factors that are influencing, you know, an outcome that you can't change. But it's freeing to know that I have power and choice myself, right? And how I want to engage in this situation that may or may not be, you know, stressing me out or whatever it might be. Okay, so I shared a lot. I'm gonna invite you all, feel free to come off mute, or you can also share in the chat. Are there any questions that came up? We just went through a lot of information in 40 minutes, 45 minutes. No? Okay,
This is Charlie.
go ahead, Charlie.
I don't think we emphasize enough the time it takes to create good relationships. And the reason I say that is so many people are having trouble. They jump into these quick relationships without the time to really cement them. And then we enter a problem solving situation. So I'd like to see, especially our schools with teenagers, to emphasize the time necessary to really create a good relationship and everything that goes into doing that. I'd like to have your observation on that.
No, 100%, Charlie. And I've actually spoken with educators about one. I've also been in the classroom supporting educators who did take that time to really build the structures with students to, you know, emphasize relationship building, right? And actually, I remember just like our training too as an organization. We had a whole month of training before we even went into the community and worked with the schools, right? And they trained us on, hey, like here's some tactics on how to build that trusting relationship with the students, with the staff, right? And especially, I even say, you know, especially when it comes to, you know, sometimes low income communities too, or whatever it might be, in general, right? Like having that trust building is essential. And I've also spoken with educators where maybe their organization didn't take that time to do that. They didn't take that time to build trust within the team. And, you know, there were, you know, some team members that were singled out, or they weren't being treated the same as others on the team, right? And it really caused a lot of conflict. And we actually call it storming. There's a phase of team development. There was a lot of storming that required some normalizing for them to move past that phase. So 100%, Charlie, relationships definitely take time to build. Any others? Thoughts?
I'll ask Kathy. So if you're attempting to encourage communication, and you know, if one party is attempting to be, you know, demonstrating a little more self-awareness and trying to meet someone, meet them halfway, how would you recommend that people can engage the other party and not see this as something that's like an attack and a problem, like we're not communicating well, it's your fault? And how do we get them to not, you know, let those defenses come down, get them to be an equal part in this and be engaged and see that it's for their benefit as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question, Shelby. I would say any of the strategies we went over help, right? And you may find yourself, okay, I am trying to paraphrase and really, you know, put myself in the shoes of the other. And sometimes it can be really difficult because it's like, hey, and it takes vulnerability. Hey, I'm genuinely trying to understand. Like, can you please help me, right? Help me to understand, like, am I not understanding this correctly from your that? And it can be hard because sometimes it's like, well, there may be deadlines and like we kind of need to just move things along. And so it may require, again, you know, looking at some of the other approaches of like, hey, is my heart at peace in this, right? Am I having a bias coming in, right? Am I building relationships with others who can help me maybe identify like, hey, I need to speak with this person, and you know, what do you think is the best way or best approach, right? Or maybe it's not even you who's having that conversation. Maybe it's somebody who has more influence on that person, who can help, help them to get some of those walls down.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I see Summer. When setting up a time to chat with someone about conflict or tension, what are some ways that we can prepare for that? And setting up a time to chat with someone about conflict or tension. So I would say some ways that we can prepare for that. Again, maybe I'll also go back to this slide up here. Let me share my screen again. Great question, Summer. So let me go back. Ooh. Oops, let's see. Yeah, so I know that we didn't get through all of these, but I would say that, again, preparing on your approach, I would be really considering about these 5 things. And also when we say setting norms of like asking yourself that question too, what are some norms that we can set, to create that sense of trust and respect, mutual respect, and also, create that sense of safety in our conversation. Maybe that's, agreeing to disagree could be a big one, right? Like we don't need to agree on everything, right? But that could be one. Let's say if it's a situation where there's harm, maybe a norm to set would be, taking responsibility for the impact and not necessarily intent. Oftentimes I like to say, we want to see the best in people 99% of the time. People may not, they're not trying to do harm by others. And so, coming in with that, am I, what is it? Like, am I owning up and also acknowledging my role in it, right? Of like, okay, I'm sorry that my actions impacted you in this way, or, X, Y, whatever it might be. So that would be some examples of norms. Let's see. Heart at Peace reminds me of the parenting saying connection before correction. Yes, Moani. And also I've heard this term before, or this phrase before too, of oftentimes people don't care about what you know until they know that you care, right? So it is always about connection and building that relationship first. Okay, so to close us out, I'm just gonna end with our last slide, which has my contact information, in case, in case anyone would like to reach out, it has my email and also our phone number as well. And then this is us, the Amalu coaching team on the side. But thank you again to all of you for showing up, and also for Shelby and the Ikahi Mediation Center. I will hand it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy. That was a wonderful presentation. We can all learn to be better workers in our relationships, because relationships do take work. So these are some great tips that don't feel like work, but can really get us thinking. So thank you, Kathy, for that presentation. And thank you all for coming today. And as a reminder, please take a few minutes to fill out our short survey online, which really helps with our grant funding for this free series. You can find the survey link in the chat, which I'll be putting in now. And then just also be sure to also check your email up in the coming days, because we will be sending you the video link, which you can watch on YouTube, as well as the survey link in case you miss it in this chat. So thank you so, so much. Mahalo, and we will see you all next month.